My name is Mitchell Parks. This paper is Dumbledore, Agamemnon, and the Imperfect Legacy. So here we go. All right. It is no secret among Harry Potter scholars that the seventh novel, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, is unique in the series in the fact that it has two epigraphs at the start, sandwiched between the table of contents and the first chapter. These are short quotations from two works of real-world literature, the Greek tragedian Aeschylus's play Libation Bearers and the Quaker author William Penn's More Fruits of Solitude. My focus in this presentation is on the Libation Bearers epigraph. Although it has received plenty of attention from other readers, I believe that its full implications for understanding the character of Albus Dumbledore have not yet been spelled out. So, the Libation Bearers epigraph consists of an English translation of 13 lines of ancient Greek poetry taken from the midpoint of the play, a play which is itself the middle entry in a trilogy customarily called the Oresteia. The translation is that of Robert Fagel's for the Penguin Classics edition from the late 1970s. Here it is. Oh, the torment bred in the race, the grinding scream of death and the stroke that hits the vein, the hemorrhage none can staunch, the grief, the curse no man can bear. I can't really summon the moroseness for this right now, sorry, it's too fun to be here. But there is a cure in the house, and not outside it, no, not from others, but from them, their bloody strife. We sing to you, dark gods beneath the earth. Now hear you blissful powers underground, answer the call, send help, bless the children, give them triumph now. Aeschylus, the Libation Bearers. At first glance, the passage is stark, violent, and surprising. That said, the alert Harry Potter reader, even with no knowledge of the source text, can immediately find some points of contact. The curse no man can bear sounds like the unstoppable killing curse. The cure in the house sounds like a cure from within the wizarding world, and especially from Hogwarts with its system of houses. And for that matter, the disease to be cured is presumably Voldemort. The children are clearly the young Harry, Hermione, and Ron. These points have been noted since Deathly Hallows was released in 2007. Further consideration requires more context to allow these two works of literature to enter into conversation with each other inside our heads, kind of like Harry and Dumbledore at King's Cross. If your Aeschylus is a little rusty, here is what I consider the key information to get you up to speed. The Oresteia is a collective name, meaning the story of the mythological character Orestes, that we use to refer to three plays by the Athenian playwright Aeschylus, namely Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, and Eumenides. So what is the story of Orestes? In short, after a 10-year war, the Greek army has conquered Troy, and its supreme commander, Agamemnon, has come home to Argos triumphant, only to be tricked and murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus, who take over the kingdom together. Clytemnestra is motivated, among other concerns, by the fact that Agamemnon had sacrificed their daughter Iphigeneia to the goddess Artemis in order to secure the ability of the Greek fleet to sail to Troy in the first place. In the second play, the teenaged Orestes, their son, returns from exile and avenges his father by killing his mother and Aegisthus. Afterward, Orestes is driven mad by the guilt of matricide, a guilt brought to life in the third play in the form of the demonic goddesses known as the Furies, but he is eventually cured and restored to his father's throne. Let's start with some basic parallels between the stories, inspired by the epigraph's invitation to connect them. Both texts, and here I am talking specifically about Deathly Hallows and Libation Bearers, feature a set of three young people. Harry and his friends Hermione and Ron on the one hand, and Orestes, his surviving sister, Electra, and their friend Pylades on the other. Each trio's mission is to attempt a counter-coup against a tyrannical regime, Voldemort and the Death Eaters on the one hand, and Clytemnestra and Aegisthus on the other. Each of these tyrannies is founded on the death of a problematic father figure, namely Hogwarts headmaster Albus Dumbledore and Clytemnestra's husband Agamemnon. Of course, Dumbledore is not Harry's biological father, and James is relevant to this intertextual complex too. In Half-Blood Prince, in a chapter that Brett Rogers has analyzed as deeply Aeschylean, Dumbledore even seems to map James's death onto that of Agamemnon. As he says to Harry, "If Voldemort had never murdered your father, would he have imparted in you a furious desire for revenge?" In my view, the collocation of murdered your father, revenge, and even the word furious, which echoes the name of the Furies, points to the Oresteia as a model for Harry's journey. So what does the epigraph add? Well, one early critic, Alice Mills, noted the violence of the language of the epigraph and its apparent disconnect from the non-violence espoused by the series, deeming Orestes a much better match for Voldemort, who did in fact murder one of his own parents, than for Harry. I would argue that Orestes is an exceptionally good match for Harry if we take the epigraph's position at the start of the novel seriously. Its implied audience is Harry himself, specifically the Harry who, at the outset of this novel, Deathly Hallows, feels a strong desire for vengeance against Dumbledore's apparent killer, Snape. At any rate, in Mills's reading, focused on the plot element of kinslaying, the epigraph exposes the distance between the two works and their apparent worldviews. This is certainly one of its functions, and a key component of intertextual reading is to consider difference at least as much as similarity. That said, Mills's reading has rightly been criticized for its limited scope by others, including Rogers. Rogers grounds his reading instead on identifying a package of themes shared by the two texts. For Rogers, it is not scattered plot elements like kinslaying that matter, but rather what the texts aim to teach, namely, how young people can respond to tyranny. Both Beatrice Groves and Helen Lovett have offered brief but even more holistic readings of the epigraph. Their readings both stress how children respond not just to tyranny, but to all kinds of problems foisted on them by their predecessors. In Groves's words, the theme of family as destiny. In this talk, I extend these readings by examining the theme of deliberation in the light of an imperfect legacy. Why does Orestes avenge his child-murdering father? Why does Harry stand by Dumbledore's memory? As I argue, both texts construct a dilemma that requires decisive action in the face of moral ambiguity. The intertextual engagement between the two texts on this theme is specific and pervasive, and the overall effect is to cast Harry as an improvement on the figure of Orestes. At this point, it is worth remembering that the Libation Bearers epigraph points the reader to a very specific moment in the Oresteia. There are many other connections between Harry Potter and the Oresteia more broadly, but the intertextual resonance begins with this specific passage from which the epigraph derives, which is known as the komos, or lamentation song, for the dead Agamemnon. The lines quoted in the epigraph form the very last part of the song, and for those who are less familiar with theater history and might think ancient drama is a bit stuffy, it's worth remembering that all Greek tragedies were originally musicals. At this point in the play, Orestes has secretly returned home to Argos and teamed up with his sister Electra and the chorus of Clytemnestra's enslaved women. After it becomes clear that they all desire to avenge Agamemnon's death, they sing the komos before his tomb. The scene is one part belated funeral, one part ritual aimed at enlisting Agamemnon's supernatural assistance. As the Komos in Libation Bearers is one of the longest, most complex, and most intensely studied songs in all of Greek tragedy, I cannot do justice to its interpretation here, but I want to point out three intertextually relevant figures. The first is the setting, at the tomb of Agamemnon. Just as the Komos is structurally at the center of the play, so too is the center of Deathly Hallows occupied by the Christmas sequence, by which I mean the chain of events leading from the ill-fated stop at Godric's Hollow to the appearance of Snape's Patronus and the destruction of the Locket Horcrux. Crucially, this sequence sees Harry confronting, for the first time, the grave of his parents. Both Harry and Orestes make a homecoming to a home that has not been theirs since early childhood and pause to reflect at the graveside. The meta-literary signals that suggest a connection with the epigraph passage are multiple. Harry and Hermione encounter not just one, but three different graves. Harry's lament for his parents is doubled by Dumbledore, who has preceded him in mourning his own family there. And for that matter, they note the grave of Ignotus Peverell, who turns out to be one of Harry's distant ancestors. In other words, the visit to the grave contains traces of previous visits and of ancestors, which we can read as metaphors for the intertextual traces of previous texts in the literary tradition. And if these metaphors were not enough to imply links to real-life literary predecessors, this passage is also the only place in the entire series, apart from the epigraphs at the start, where authentic Muggle texts are overtly quoted, the New Testament verses that appear on the headstones of the Dumbledores and the Potters. The presence of these quotations by itself would call attention to the relevance of the novel's epigraphs to this scene as a sort of hyperlink back to the only other quotations of their kind. But on top of that, the characters explicitly reflect here on the art of choosing and interpreting quotations. This happens first with the tomb of Kendra and Ariana Dumbledore. After Harry processes his discomfort about the fact that Albus Dumbledore never took him to the graveyard himself, he turns to processing the text. He read the words on the tombstone again. "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." He did not understand what those words meant. Surely Dumbledore had chosen them, as the eldest member of his family once his mother had died. Here Harry models attentive reading, indeed information literacy, through his willingness to swallow his emotions, to reread, to acknowledge his own initial ignorance, and to consider the source of the epitaph, all things that one can do with the novel's epigraph quotations as well. Next comes Harry's parents' grave, where again, Harry and Hermione exemplify good reading habits through their attempt to interpret the text in dialogue with each other, which is a minor miracle considering the absence of literary analysis from the Hogwarts curriculum. It is reasonable to assume that Dumbledore selected the Potter's epitaph as well, thereby mirroring, in his process of selecting two epitaphs, the placement of the twin epigraphs at the novel's opening. Dumbledore is thereby revealed as a kind of author figure, setting the plot in motion and seeding it with elusive meanings. Harry goes on to mimic Dumbledore's author function when he composes an epitaph for Dobby in turn, and he inscribes it with Malfoy's wand, the very item that will enable him to outdo Dumbledore as the weaver of the plot by solving the mystery of the Elder Wand. You, the reader, are asked to follow in Harry's footsteps as an interpreter with respect to the epigraphs at the novel's start. Okay. A second important aspect of the komos is how this passage is introduced. Just as the chorus's words that close the komos are especially worth noting, since Deathly Hallows quotes them as an epigraph, so too, structurally, should we note the song's beginning, also in the mouths of the chorus. "Justice turns the wheel, word for word, curse for curse be borne now, justice thunders, hungry for retribution. Stroke for bloody stroke be paid, the one who acts must suffer. 3 generations strong, the word resounds." This opening reminds the audience of a crucial theme of the Oresteia, which is the social problem of eye for an eye justice. As many readers have noted, the final play in the trilogy proposes a model of justice that takes on the cycle of vengeance that requires tit-for-tat suffering and ends it. The critical point of contact between this passage and Deathly Hallows is the way that the Elder Wand is said to pass by violence from owner to owner. First Harry and then Dumbledore will attempt to break this eye for an eye pattern too. If the epigraph passage, with its call for bloody strife, seems to suggest that violent vengeance will form an important part of the conclusion of the Harry Potter series, it is a ruse. Both plots, in the Oresteia and Harry Potter, are founded on violence, but they will not end that way. The third relevant aspect of the komos is the uncertainty of the participants. Here the parallel is not so exact, but the differences are telling. Whereas Harry deliberates across the length of Deathly Hallows about the nature of his quest, and especially about his feelings toward Dumbledore, in this scene, Orestes and his allies do not question their goal of avenging Agamemnon or doubt Agamemnon's worthiness. Instead, the uncertainty takes the form of the children's doubt about the possibility of communicating with the dead, an anxiety very much at home in Harry Potter as well. Despite their plea for supernatural help, Agamemnon's ghost does not appear. Ultimately, they must attempt their coup without his overt approval and support. What may surprise readers is that, by contrast, regarding his mission of killing his mother, Orestes hardly hesitates. But we readers do not have to process his dilemma in the same way that he does, nor in the same way as an ancient audience. Harry's dilemma brings out new facets of the problem of avenging Agamemnon. For what it is worth, Harry and Orestes share a more or less unflinching approach toward their antagonist. Harry does not doubt the justice of stopping Voldemort, only its possibility and the methods of accomplishing it. Those doubts are fueled in large part by the complications of his relationship with Dumbledore as he processes them over the course of the novel. These complications, I suggest, can help us rethink how the Oresteia itself expects us to process the moral dilemma of Agamemnon's own guilt. Harry's deliberations begin with the second chapter of Deathly Hallows. The obituary for Dumbledore in the Daily Prophet sets the stage for Harry's grappling with the past in the final novel. Even though it does not disabuse him of his positive feelings toward Dumbledore as other information will later on, the obituary does cause Harry to realize the depth of his ignorance about his mentor. It also subtly introduces the important phrase, "for the greater good," here appearing innocuously, but looking forward to questions of the appropriate use of power and violence that will occupy Harry's thoughts about Dumbledore and about his own methods. That glimpse of "for the greater good" resembles the way in which the moral, "the one who acts must suffer," is repeated and problematized throughout the Oresteia. Once Harry is done reading the obituary, this chapter sets it into relief through pairing it with a newspaper article featuring Rita Skeeter's forthcoming exposé, which enrages Harry. During the wedding scene, Harry's initial ignorance and pro-Dumbledore indignation give way to an icy bewilderment when he learns that Dumbledore's sister Ariana was a squib and that he and Dumbledore had family members buried in the same cemetery. The conversation at the wedding means that the next time Harry encounters a preview of Skeeter's book, he reacts not with rage but with questioning, and he soon realizes that he has to take matters into his own hands rather than relying on whatever Dumbledore's intent was. It is after Godric's Hollow that Harry's feelings toward Dumbledore reach their lowest point. This sequence coincides, as I've already described, with the komos in terms of its placement and setting. It is in reading Skeeter's book and absorbing her version of Ariana's death that Harry comes to doubt, quote, that Dumbledore had really cared. The way he connects his own relationship with Dumbledore to Ariana's story is prescient, as we will see. At any rate, her death hangs over Albus's backstory, as revealed over the course of the novel. In Rita Skeeter's words, "Is it possible that Ariana Dumbledore was the first person to die for the greater good?" Here she quotes Dumbledore's letter to Grindelwald, which employs the phrase that would later become Grindelwald's motto. As Dumbledore writes, "We seize control for the greater good, and from this it follows that where we meet resistance, we must use only the force that is necessary and no more." I would like to highlight Dumbledore's choice of words, that they should use only the force that is necessary. These words forge a connection with a famous key passage from the first play in the Oresteia, the Agamemnon, in which the chorus, in an enormous exposition dump of a song, describes Agamemnon's sacrifice of Iphigeneia at the outset of the Trojan War. Dumbledore's mode of rationalizing and justifying violence mirrors the politics of Agamemnon's yoke strap of necessity, or in Fagel's translation, the strap of fate, the stance he adopted to save face in front of his men and enable the destruction of Troy. By mirroring Iphigeneia's death in Ariana's, Deathly Hallows takes Agamemnon's backstory as presented in the Agamemnon and scatters it across the novel in the form of Skeeter's writings, allowing us to process it alongside Harry. Unlike the audience, Orestes the character is not privy to what the chorus of the Agamemnon had to say. He does not have much context for evaluating his father's actions. Harry has the advantage, as he is allowed to gather the echoes of "for the greater good" in what he learns of Dumbledore's life and weigh them for himself. In doing so, unlike Orestes, who falls into the trap of violence and cannot be the means of his own salvation, Harry can choose to follow through on Dumbledore's mission without succumbing to Dumbledore's sins. As the Battle of Hogwarts begins, Harry sets himself apart. Ron and Hermione encourage him to let their friends help find Ravenclaw's diadem. In response, we read that Harry thought fast, his scar still prickling, his head threatening to split again. Dumbledore had warned him against telling anyone but Ron and Hermione about the Horcruxes. Secrets and lies, that's how we grew up. And Albus, he was a natural. Was he turning into Dumbledore, keeping his secrets clutched to his chest, afraid to trust? His Voldemort-related headache metaphorically suggests his split mind, torn between Dumbledore's methods and his own. To resolve the issue, he remembers Dumbledore's warning, and he quotes Aberforth's words in his head. Like a good reader, he sees Dumbledore's life as a text to interpret and act upon. In the end, he chooses to let people in. To back up a little, the resonance of Agamemnon's sacrifice of Iphigeneia deepens when we consider not just Dumbledore's backstory, but the main action of the series. For instance, Deathly Hallows also plays with this passage of the Agamemnon in its very first chapter, where Charity Burbage's death is presented as another mirror of Iphigeneia's, another sacrifice of a woman to start a war. But what is even more important to the series is the fact that, like Agamemnon, Dumbledore sets in motion a plan that leads to what he considers the only acceptable endgame, but it entails the sacrifice of a child, Harry himself. The passage I quoted a moment ago, in which Harry chooses not to follow Dumbledore in his secrets and lies, continues like this. But Dumbledore had trusted Snape, and where had that led? To murder at the top of the highest tower. Some suffering cannot be escaped through different choices. Harry, in continuing to trust Dumbledore even as he distances himself from his mentor, must go to his own death, as Snape puts it, like a pig for slaughter. Just like Ariana before him, Harry too turns out to be a double of Iphigeneia, dying for the greater good, as Aberforth points out. As I head toward the conclusion, I would like to return to the epigraph text. The formatting of the chorus's song is just as it appears in the Penguin edition, same in Deathly Hallows, same in the Penguin, but it is worth noting that it eerily resembles a lightning bolt in its layout on the page. It is even easier to see it as such when one considers another paratextual inclusion, the 7-way dedication several pages beforehand, where the plot relevance of the number 7 and the lightning shape are unmistakable. This raises an interesting possibility for reading. Given the prominence of the lightning bolt in the series as the shape of Harry's scar, the similar shape of the epigraph suggests that Harry's forehead is, metaphorically speaking, inscribed with the epigraph text. In other words, that he is marked from infancy not only as Voldemort's equal, but as another Orestes. This does not, however, mean that he is doomed to repeat Orestes' fate exactly, any more than being a Horcrux means he must equal Voldemort's violence and psychopathy. Harry, as the intertextual heir of both Orestes and Iphigeneia, is able to learn and to make choices that allow him to sacrifice himself, to win, and to survive. In summary, relative to the, and I'm aware I went a little over time, sorry there. Relative to the Oresteia, Harry Potter slows us down over the deliberation process regarding the ambiguities of the past. Although his journey is not without difficult and even negative choices at times, Harry is vindicated because he, unlike Orestes, does not seek straightforwardly to follow or avenge his father figure, but rather to reconcile himself to the latter's past. Dumbledore is far beyond some generic mentor out of Joseph Campbell, dying to allow his student to become a hero. Indeed, Harry's psychological processes cast Dumbledore almost as another antagonist, alongside Voldemort and death itself. By quoting Libation Bearers at its outset, Deathly Hallows invites a comparison between Dumbledore and Agamemnon. This comparison cracks open the Oresteia in turn, allowing readers to view that text from new angles. Finally, it also models, in our own lives, one way to think about others with imperfect legacies, such as people whose work set in motion things important to us, but which are left to us to see through, perhaps in better ways than they might have foreseen. Thank you.